No mai, haere mai. Welcome to the Maxim Institute podcast. I'm Jason, the communications manager here at Maxim. Each week, we pair our latest column with an insightful conversation, taking you behind the scenes of our weekly columns and chatting with the authors to unpack the research, ideas, and discussions that shape their work. Get ready to dig into the latest topic. Today, we talk to Communications Coordinator Josiah Brown about his recent column. Josiah, welcome along to the podcast. Great to have you with us, mate.
It's great to be here.
We're talking about your column for Maxim. Climate finance is a hot mess. Now, that's an interesting way to describe climate finance. But you talk about COP29, the recent conference that's happened, and the agreement that we've all signed up to. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so the 29th annual COP conference was held recently, and it wasn't without drama. India in particular was leading the charge, saying that it was basically rigged, that the whole thing was stage managed. But eventually there was an agreement reached between the rich countries and the poor countries there represented. And that agreement was that these rich nations, including New Zealand, would pay $300 billion annually and give that money to poor countries to mitigate the effects of climate change. So that's where we're at. We don't know just how much New Zealand's contribution will be, but shortly after, World Vision and Oxfam released a press release, a joint one, and they're saying that New Zealand needs to pay its fair share. Now, what is that? That's $558 million annually by next year, so we need to be offering that amount each year. By 2030, that figure needs to double, and they're saying that by 2035, the total amount that we should be giving in international climate aid should be $1.9 trillion. That is a huge sum.
That is crazy. And leaving aside the fact that I don't feel particularly rich, given the cost of living crisis that's going on, what are we getting for like what's $1.9 trillion? What is that? How does that impact the global climate? Is there evidence-based research that's gone behind what the investments are going to be, how we're going to do that? I mean, you say India was complaining that it was rigged. There seems to be a whole lot of politicking going on in the background here. Can we drill down a bit more on what this actually is? Like, what for 1.9 trillion? I want to know what I'm getting for that. Like, we better have a whole new planet for something like that, you know?
Well, it's important to remember that that's just a recommendation from Oxfam and World Vision. Nonetheless, I think it's worth paying attention to because these organizations do shape the conversation. So it's not unreasonable to expect that may be what we pay. But it is a little bit of a mystery box because we don't know what we've committed to financially, and we also don't really know what we're going to get. Going back to their criticism that New Zealand needs to pay its fair share, if you take the global contribution right now, which is $100 billion in international climate aid, and you divide that by our share of global emissions, which is 0.09%, you get us contributing $153 million a year. That's our fair share by those numbers. Actually, though, New Zealand has committed $1.3 billion for the period 2022 to 2025. So it would actually already seem that we're paying our fair share. Now, what are we getting for that money? Well, it's a zero-sum game when we're talking about finance. Any money we send overseas is money we can't spend here, money that we desperately need. There are hospitals that need more funding. There are nurses that need to be paid adequately for their work. There are teachers that need to be paid adequately for their work. We've got infrastructure deficits. That's well documented. Schools need more funding. So New Zealand, are we rich? No. How are we paying for this? Well, we're actually borrowing this money so we can send it overseas. So we are actually making a very significant sacrifice. We stand to make a very significant sacrifice if we go ahead with this. And so the question becomes, well, where is this money going? Unfortunately, climate finance is a hot mess, as the title of my column suggests. Oxfam reported that $42 billion from the World Bank, which was set aside for climate funds, over the past 7 years has gone unaccounted for due to poor record keeping. A Reuters report revealed that $65 billion in climate finance has basically just disappeared. It is so vaguely reported on that it's impossible to trace. We actually don't even know which continent this money has gone to. Another study found that due to political and administrative barriers, only about 17% of the total adaptation finance actually reached local communities between 2017 to 2021. So those numbers really do speak for themselves. The state of international climate finance is not in a great way.
I was going to say before you rolled out those numbers, some people like you saying we're borrowing money to pay this bill, and it is a sacrifice for us. We're obviously not investing that money in infrastructure or in healthcare or education. And I remember seeing an article a few weeks back about a road, like one of the state highways, its sections is going to close for a few months because we have to repair all the potholes because we haven't done maintenance on it. So we are sacrificing, but some people would say that that is a sacrifice that we need to make for the greater good of the planet and for these countries that are not as well off as us. But then you point to the fact that all of these the billions of dollars are just missing, like it's a fiscal black hole that there's no accountability. And then on top of that, less than 20% of all of the money that's given. So if I give $100, $17 is going to the actual people doing the work. Like you say, it's a hot mess. That's, I guess, a kind of a calm, like easy, soft way to describe what's going on. It seems to be a bit of a game that's being played here with money. Is there something we could do about it other than just giving money away to people? Are there, I guess, low-hanging fruit or more sound investments or smarter things we could do? I guess it's not necessarily just multilateral giving of money, but maybe specific project investments or something like that.
Yeah, well, I think most Kiwis really do want to invest in the developing world. We recognize that we're blessed where we are at the moment, and so we're willing to make sacrifices. What we need to make sure is that those sacrifices are actually paying off. We might feel good for giving this money away, but if it's not having an impact, really we're wasting our time. Part of the challenge is that a lot of this climate funding that's collected internationally and is dispersed goes to countries with some of the biggest issues with corruption. 40% of all official development assistance goes to high-risk countries where aid is vulnerable to misappropriation, to corruption, unfortunately. And so you think, well, what is the solution? And it isn't, unfortunately, the high trust approach that our government takes toward climate finance. Basically, we give this money away with no strings attached or very few. And we say, we give this money to you, to specific governments and organizations, and say, spend it as you see fit. But high trust is, in some ways, an exercise in language to maybe disguise the reality that there isn't a whole lot of accountability going on here. The Office of the Auditor General recently admitted that actually our climate reporting isn't what it needs to be. So if we have issues ourselves reporting on what we're spending in the realm of climate, how are other countries who are less developed going to do? Not super well. And so it becomes a question of how can we invest as effectively as possible, and what are some principles we can use to guide that investment? One great example is Chimneys for Africa. I think they offer a really fantastic template for what international aid should look like. So for them, it's all about being locally deliverable. It's about listening to the needs on the ground and actually asking first, what do you need and how can we help? So I think if we take that principle and apply it to climate funding, we actually need to be identifying on the ground projects with very specific objectives that we can measure success by. So in the Chimneys for Africa case, they've designed a ventilation system, which is simple but intuitive. Now you might think, well, one solution is, for instance, gas cooking. Well, that's fine, but what happens when the gas runs out? And how about the equipment? If the houses only last 5 years and you install these gas, cooking stations, the house falls over in 5 years and you need to start again. So, all of these other solutions that had been proposed prior to mitigate the effects of smoke inhalation, which is, almost like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, a real health crisis. They proposed an alternative solution, which was these fairly simple but innovative chimneys, which would extract the smoke from inside the house and take it out and reduce the harm caused there. Now, this is culturally appropriate, so it still maintains the practice of indoor cooking, which is is not something that they want to change, but it's also not invasive and means that these simple chimneys can be installed at a local level and means that even when there aren't aid workers there, they can continue to do this for their own good. So applying that principle for us, thinking about how we partner with people, particularly in the Pacific, is a really important thing that we need to be doing.
And it is, I guess, striking a balance between accountability and the idea that maybe withholding money because a country is not doing what we want it to do, that there's kind of that balance there, right? Where you go, we're going to give you this money, we want you to be accountable for it, but we're not going to force you by withholding this money to do something that we want you to do. It's like you say, I think the best word to describe it is hot mess, Josiah. And there's a lot to think about, a lot to untangle, and your column raises a lot of points. So I hope people will read it and really think about it and engage with this issue. So thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Jason. Nobody in their right mind would buy something without knowing what it is, especially when the price tag is TBD. Yet that's essentially what happened at COP29, where rich nations, including New Zealand, agreed to pay poorer countries $300 billion annually by 2035 to combat climate change. How much New Zealand will pay is still unclear. Non-profits like World Vision and Oxfam say that New Zealand must, quote, step up and pay our fair share, end quote. They're calling on the government to commit $558 million annually by 2025, with a total finance goal of $1.9 trillion by 2035. Given that New Zealand contributes just 0.09% of global emissions, our fair share of the current $100 billion US target amounts to 153 million New Zealand dollars annually. Yet, we've already committed 1.3 billion New Zealand dollars for 2022 to 2025. Keep in mind that this isn't a debate about climate change itself. It's about prudent spending. Just how much are we willing to forego in terms of schools, hospitals, and other public services to fund this? Finance is a zero-sum game. What we spend here means less for essential services. But it's not just about how much we give. It's also about how that money is spent. Unfortunately, climate finance is alarmingly opaque. Oxfam reported that $41 billion in climate finance from the World Bank over the past 7 years went unaccounted for due to poor record keeping. A 2023 Reuters report revealed that $65 billion was so vaguely reported that it's impossible to trace where it went, or even which continent received it. Another issue is that funds often fail to reach local communities due to political and administrative barriers. The Adaptation Gap report found that only 17% of adaptation finance reached the local level between 2017 to 2021. Additionally, many of the top recipients of climate aid are also the most corrupt nations, with 42% of all official development assistance, ODA, flowing to countries where the risk of misappropriation is high. In such a murky system, how can we be sure that the funds will actually reach those in need? Despite these concerns, New Zealand maintains a high-trust approach to climate finance. It's hardly a strategy and doesn't qualify as localism when, as Bjorn Lomberg points out, Pacific nations like Tonga feel pressured to adopt solutions imposed by New Zealand. Instead of pouring money into a global slush fund, we could focus on direct, transparent investments that tangibly improve people's lives in developing countries. Let's start by asking what they need. One promising project is Chimneys for Africa, which offers a template for what international aid should look like. By listening to locals and designing culturally appropriate, locally deliverable solutions, they have created a simple yet life-changing ventilation system to mitigate the harmful effects of indoor cooking fires. This approach, investing in on-the-ground projects with clearly defined objectives, ensures that funds are spent where they can do the most good. We face a choice. Continue pouring money into a leaky bucket, or fund specific projects that deliver real, measurable results. As a taxpayer, it's your money. What would you do?
Thanks for tuning in to the Maxim Institute podcast. If you want to stay updated on our latest research and insights into New Zealand politics and policy, sign up for our monthly forum email and event invites on our website. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. From the team at Maxim, mā te wā. Goodbye for now.